Hi, my name is Dr. Joyce Alberts. I'm a clinical psychologist working in private practice based in North Canterbury, New Zealand. I've posted a number of videos on my YouTube channel, and I am using the Zoom platform as a way that I can record videos, share screens, put up information, and discuss topics that I'm interested in, particularly related to the vulnerability of women and children when they're in positions where other people are making decisions on their behalf. I've done a series of videos related to a group called the Gloriavale Christian Community, which has raised considerable concern amongst many here in New Zealand, and also to the two trials of Karen Reid, who was accused of causing the death of her then boyfriend, John O'Keefe. But this new couple of videos that I'm posting are related to a case that is occurring as we speak. Today is the 12th of August 2026, and I've been following the murder trial of Lindsay Clancy. Lindsay Clancy is being tried in Massachusetts, United States of America. There is an agreement with her defense that she caused the tragic death of her three children due to postpartum depression with psychosis. The prosecution disagrees with this, and they are going ahead with the trial on both the accusation of causing the death of the three children in absence of any mental health issues, and then it will move, if it was found guilty, it would move to the penalty phase. So in the first video that I posted, this was relating to the evidence given for the prosecution of two psychiatrists, one Dr. Aaliyah Goodhart and the other one Dr. Jennifer Tuft. I forgot her name. I spent quite a bit more time on Dr. Jennifer Tuft, and I've learned a few more pieces of information. And the important timeline that I pointed out was the 15th of September, and this was 2022, and then through to the 1st of January 2023, and then the tragic day, which was January 24th, 2023. So just to give a brief update, so Lindsay was married to her husband, Patrick. Lindsay worked as a nurse in a birthing unit. Lindsay and her husband, Patrick, had three children, a daughter and two sons, with the youngest son having been born in May of 2022. So this is roughly about 3.5, 4 months prior to Lindsay first seeking medical treatment for depressed mood and high anxiety. I've since discovered too that with the birth of the middle child, the first son, Lindsay did experience a period of postpartum depression and high anxiety and had received treatment for that. Lindsay also had experienced a period of low mood or depressed mood and was treated with an antidepressant, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, an SSRI, which apparently she tolerated well. And according to information I heard given during the trial today, so that would be the 11th of August for United States of America, that she in fact was on that medication potentially for up to 12 months. So that was prior, this is when she was studying, when she was much younger, and we're looking at the period of September 2022 through to January of 2023. So subsequent to the tragedy that occurred on the 24th of January 2023, Lindsay suffered a traumatic spinal injury, which severed her spinal cord. She has high-level paraplegic, and she is now confined to a wheelchair. So when she attends court, she is sitting in her wheelchair, She's wheeled into the court and she's wheeled out of the court. Interestingly, her husband and her husband's family, as well as her own family, have remained supportive of Lindsay. They've been very critical of the medical treatment she received, and in fact, 2 civil cases have been taken against the various medical providers who are involved in Lindsay's care. Lindsay herself has undertaken a civil case of medical mistreatment. I can't remember the exact legal term for that. And her ex-husband, Patrick, has taken a civil case against the medical providers for unlawfully causing the tragic death of the 3 children. So yes, Patrick has subsequently separated and divorced from Lindsay. He himself is remarried and apparently has a child to his second wife. Now, one of the reasons I was focusing in on Dr. Tuft was the query around her level of experience, given the complex nature and the acute symptom presentation of someone such as Lindsay. So Lindsay has reached out to the practice in which Dr. Tuft was employed. It was a private practice providing outpatient care. I have gone on to the website and it was called Astor Health, and Dr. Tuft, her current bio, all about Dr. Tuft on that practice's website says that she has an interest in the perinatal care of women, the postpartum period. So this is the period post-birth, where it is well known and well documented that huge fluctuations in hormone levels can occur, and that can contribute to the presentation of low mood, increased anxiety, and in rare cases, the onset of a psychotic break. I mentioned that I was curious about her level of experience. So it turns out that Dr. Tuft she completed a 4-year residency. So this would have been from 2018 until 2022. It was around, I think, May of 2022 or August of 2022 when she completed that residency. So she did a 4-year psychiatric or psychiatry residency post her medical school training. So at the time that she begins her psychiatry residency, she's a fully qualified medical doctor, but is now working under the mentoring and supervision of a more senior psychiatrist as she completes her psychiatry residency. This may, I'm not sure how relevant this actually is, but it may surprise some people that she was employed, I understand, at the end of August of 2022 by Astor Health or Astor Mental Health, and she received her final certification or qualification as a psychiatrist, a fully qualified psychiatrist able to practice independently on September the 12th of 2022. Her first visit with Lindsay Clancy was via video call or telehealth over a platform similar to Zoom. I understand it may have even been Zoom, which is quite commonly used in the United States, even used for family court hearings or other court hearings, etc. So what caught my eye was the manner in which Dr. Tuft undertook her assessment and then subsequent treatment of Lindsay. So, for example, she only saw Lindsay through the telehealth platform over video conference call. She saw her from the 15th of September up until the 23rd of January 2023, the day before the tragedy, by telezoom. I understand she saw Lindsay on 14 occasions, and that the focus of those sessions was primarily on medication. Not surprising, that is what psychiatrists do tend to focus on. Under cross-examination, when she is asked questions about what therapy or therapeutic intervention she provided, she did say that in the 25 minute sessions that she had with Lindsay, that she provided therapy which she described as emotional support. It also caught my eye that during the time that Lindsay remained under the care of Dr. Tuft, she had contacted the crisis helpline on 2 occasions. She presented at the emergency department on 2 occasions. She was admitted into an acute mental health ward for a period of, I think, 4 or 5 days from the 1st of January, the early hours of 1st of January 2023. She was initially sectioned under Section 12 of that particular statute, and but she did voluntarily agree to be admitted. So I understand that the Section 12 was for assessment at that acute mental health facility, which a lot of focus has been put on the fact it was a locked facility, meaning that Lindsay, even though she was there voluntarily, would not have been able to simply walk out the door. It's also my understanding that as it was the New Year period, that facility was under, due to staff leave and it being a public holiday, was running at what's been described as a skeleton crew. So a lower level of staffing than what would normally be provided, meaning that while Lindsay was seen by 3 different psychiatrists during her time there, she did not receive in-depth therapy or treatment during that time, and she chose to leave the facility due to the fact that she wanted to be home with her children as her daughter was about to turn 5. Okay, so it gives you some of the background. And on that first video, I also explained some of my own experience in my training working or being placed as part of my training as a clinical psychologist on the Mothers and Babies unit here in Christchurch, New Zealand, and my observations, my learnings, and what I've understood in terms of what can be provided by a specialist unit. It's also my understanding that it was recommended by, I think, the South Shore Perinatal Mental Health Service who Lindsay also was seeing while she was under Dr. Tuft's care, that she do reach out, that it was recommended that she undergo specialist treatment through a similar Mothers and Babies unit. Tragically, however, by the time Lindsay was assessed by that unit as part of their initial intake assessment, it was determined by those medical professionals who specialise in this area that due to the acute symptoms of depression, which they diagnosed to be subsequent to the high-level medications that Lindsay had been prescribed, that she was not a good candidate for their program until she had those levels of medication addressed, so to be reduced down to a more acceptable level, in order that she would then be able to participate in that program. So tragically, everything that Lindsay apparently was trying to do for her own mental health and for her family, she was turned away, let down, misdiagnosed, incorrectly treated. That evidence is coming out in this trial. When I say incorrectly treated, a number of registered mental health nurse practitioners and psychiatrists are being cross-examined on the prescription of specific medication which would be contradictory to what they themselves even were suggesting was Lindsay's potential diagnosis, such as bipolar. So some medications, if incorrectly prescribed or prescribed under the wrong incorrect diagnosis, could cause an escalation in symptoms. And the specialist mothers and babies unit that Lindsay had been recommended were also concerned about the number of medications, the level of medication she was on, the dosage, and that needed to be addressed. It's my understanding from the evidence that's come out during the prosecution's case is that Lindsay was prescribed between September of 2022 and January of 2023 13 different medications with different mechanisms and different side effects. So ranging from addressing symptoms such as depression, symptoms such as high anxiety, insomnia, and even prescribing medications such as an antihistamine, medication commonly used as an antihistamine because of its sedative properties. Also medications that were to sedate. The effect of the medication is sedate. At times Lindsay was saying she was not able to sleep for up to 48 hours. So I could go on and on and on, and I will put up a trigger warning in the description of this video when I post this to YouTube. So I want to go back to Dr. Tuft again. So Dr. Tuft acknowledged on cross-examination that during her residency she may have seen approximately 50 women who were experiencing postpartum depression following the birth of their child. She acknowledged that risk factors to take into consideration were previous experience of postpartum depression or anxiety, as well as a prior history of breast milk, all of which Lindsay presented with. Dr. Tuft was also queried on whether she'd ever treated someone with postpartum psychosis. And it's my understanding that she may have seen maybe one or two patients during the residency, but was adamant that Lindsay did not present with symptoms of psychosis, such as pressured speech, disconnection, or a break with reality, despite the fact that Dr. Tuft had written in her own note, she had written a number of symptoms and then not hyper, comma, pressured speech. So the way it was written in the note, anyone reading that would say, well, there were no symptoms of being hyper or elevated in mood. In fact, there were symptoms that were opposite. But reading that, not hyper, comma, pressured speech would then suggest that pressured speech was a feature. And this was commented on by another practitioner who was questioning both bipolar because of the symptom presentation of Lindsay, but also whether this was in fact evidence of a psychosis. So let's think about this intake that Dr. Tuft did. Dr. Tuft mentioned that quite a screed of documents were sent through to Lindsay, which she had completed prior to her appointment on the 15th of September 2022. And these included a number of questionnaires, one of which she referred to was the Patient Health Questionnaire Depression, or the PHQ-9. Then she was asked into cross-examination whether she had administered the Edinburgh Post-partum Depression Scale. Dr. Tuft said no, she hadn't. That was not what they used in their service. So remember, this is a psychiatrist who said that she has an interest in the perinatal care or postpartum period, which would include women presenting to a psychiatrist with postpartum depression. It was pointed out to Dr. Tuff that the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale, or the EPDS, does seem to be the scale of preference when assessing someone for potential postpartum depression. So I wanted to have a look in this because when I was on my placement at the Mothers and Babies Unit, I don't recall hearing about the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale. There were certainly other scales that we used, scales that assess for anxiety, scales that would look at low mood, etc. And you may say, well, why is it important to consider using these scales? Because Dr. Tuff seemed to be dismissive, that they were not really helpful. I think one of the other psychiatrists, it might have been Dr. Goodhart, also said we just don't use those scales. They're just, not part of our clinical tools. Well, as a psychologist, they are very important. And in fact, I may refer to Dr. Patrice Berry and her YouTube coverage of this trial. I reached out to Dr. Berry and asked for her permission if I could use portions of her YouTube videos and the comments that she has made. Dr. Berry is a highly experienced clinical psychologist, so she has experience. Obviously, she works in the United States of America, so she's more familiar with some of the issues there, which are different for myself here in New Zealand. But she also is looking at this from the perspective of a clinician. I also have another case that I want to do a bit of comparison with. And this is a case that occurred here in New Zealand. And this was a very, very similar case. And this related also to the tragic loss of life of 3 dear, beautiful little children. Okay, let's go back to these scales. So I am going to just give you a description, and then I'm going to show you a comparison between 3 scales. Actually, I think I didn't finish my complete thought there. Why would we, myself and Dr. Berry, for example, use scales? Why would we give clients coming to see us questionnaires? We may give them at the beginning of the assessment process, at the initial consultation. Myself, like Dr. Berry, often would use them throughout a therapy intervention to monitor progress, to ensure that we are carefully assessing both subjectively and, if possibly, objectively how a client presents, whether the treatment is meeting the therapeutic goals that we set at the initial consultation meeting, in order to determine how many more sessions we may require as we begin to prepare to move towards a discharge or completion of that therapy. So let me tell you about the Patient Health Questionnaire for Depression, the PHQ-9, because this was a questionnaire that Dr. Tuff did acknowledge that she had asked Lindsay Clancy to fill out. So it is a 9-item depression scale. I'm actually reading this description from the NovoPsych website. This is a platform which allows a psychologist like myself to access. It's not free. I do pay for these, and I use them routinely. This site allows me to administer during my assessment phase and also monitoring. I can then pull this information into reports, but the important thing why we use these scales is when the scales are developed and they undergo rigorous testing to ensure that they are a valid and reliable measure of what the scale is intending to measure, and they go through robust research in some way, in similar ways to some of the clinical trials that a medication may go under to ensure that what is being prescribed to a person is safe to use. And likewise, as a psychologist, when I use the scale, I would, or a questionnaire, I would like to have that confidence that the questionnaire I'm administering to my client is going to give me the information that I require to assist me in that assessment. The questionnaire or scale itself is not diagnostic. The diagnosis is made based on gathering information from multiple sources. So the PHQ, the Patient Health Questionnaire for Depression, it's a 9-item scale. It's based directly on the diagnostic criteria for major depressive disorder that is used in the DSM, which is also referenced in this trial. In fact, the DSM-5 TR, text revision, has been held up by both the prosecution and the defence lawyer as they're making various points. The PHQ-9 is used clinically to support treatment planning, tracking changes in symptoms, and while in a non-clinical setting, such as a school or workplace, it can serve as an initial screening tool to identify individuals who may need further evaluation. It's really important to understand this is a screening tool. And you could argue that all of our questionnaires or scales are, and we do use them in that way for further evaluation or part of a more comprehensive evaluation. The PHQ, this is really important, the PHQ-9 is appropriate for individuals aged 13 and older, making it suitable for adolescents and adults. So this is a type of questionnaire that you could use with quite a wide variety of populations. You could use it to look for, as it said, to do an initial screen to say, do I need to, I give this person this questionnaire, I haven't really asked them many questions. Now sitting in the waiting room, they fill out the questionnaire, I can see the results, and then I can say, okay, from that, I'm going to have to do a more in-depth assessment, both a clinical interview and maybe administer some more comprehensive scales. So let's have a look at this. I'm going to do a share screen. So I'm going to show you what this questionnaire would look like. This may be, the format of it may look different from what the actual form that Lindsay herself filled out, but this will be typically what the patient may see. You're going to see at the bottom of the screen that there is the reference to the developer of the questionnaire, and this was developed in 2001. So I'm just bringing myself over here so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, so you can see here, this is the PHQ-9. It's asking, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems? And then down here, you will see the different questions. There are 9 questions, and then whether those symptoms appear. So no, not at all. These have appeared or occurred several days, more than half the days, nearly every day. And there is the reference down there. And you can see, while this is a PDF, using the Novopsych site, I could administer this online. I can do this as an email link to a client to fill out before the appointment, or I can pass them a tablet and they could complete this during the session. Typically, it's very quick to do and doesn't take much time. So that's a patient health questionnaire for depression. So now I'm going to show you as an example another questionnaire. So I'm going to show you, this is another questionnaire or scale that I will often use, both because of its robust validity and reliability. So this one is the Depression Anxiety Stress Scale. And what is helpful about this is it does tease apart as much as possible the overlapping symptoms that may be associated with depressed or low mood, anxiety, or stress. And that is really, really helpful as a clinician to have more of an overview of this. So the DAS, this is the short form, Depression Anxiety Stress Scale short form, the DAS-21, is a self-report measure designed to assess the severity of general psychological distress and symptoms related to depression, anxiety, and stress in adults and older adolescents of 17 years or older. So the PHQ-9, that population is 13, so adolescents 13 to adults, and the DAS-21 for 17 and upwards. So why those are important, because those are the population or sample size that this is being tested on. And so this would not be an appropriate one to administer for those under the age of 17. And there are other versions of the DAS that you can use. There's a youth version, and there's even a short clinical version, which is the DAS-10, which has 10 questions. So let me show you the DAS-21. So again, I like to use this and have clients fill this out, both as a during clinical intervention, so monitoring, and then a post to see. So I'm going to share the screen here, and you'll see the difference. So this is a more comprehensive questionnaire than the PHQ-9, and it would be one that I would use. I have not used a questionnaire such as the PHQ-9. So this one says, the instructions, please read each statement and press a response that indicates how much the statement applied to you over the past week. So the PHQ looks at the last 2 weeks, and I'll explain why, whether we look at 2 weeks or 1 week, and why there are pros and cons with both. So this asks questions such as, I found it hard to wind down. I was aware of dryness in my mouth. I couldn't seem to experience any positive feeling at all. I experienced difficulty breathing. I tended to overreact to situations. I experienced trembling. So this is asking more around those physiological symptoms that a person may or may not experience, and then how often. I found myself getting agitated. I found it difficult to relax. I felt down or blue. I was intolerant of anything that kept me from getting on with what I was doing. So becoming frustrated or irritated when you're focused on something that you want to do and someone interrupts you or something. I felt I was close to panic. I was rather touchy. I felt scared without any good reason. I felt that life was meaningless. So those are the 21 questions. And when I analysed the client's responses to those, based on the the sample population, I can look at whether this particular person is experiencing more symptoms of depression than the sample size that this was developed on, or whether their anxiety level is increased over depression, or whether they're experiencing a significant level of stress apart from depression, because those things are different. Yes, there's overlap, but they are different. In some cases, I do see that my clients will endorse significant symptoms of depression and anxiety, but not stress, or sometimes it's the other way around. And that can give me further follow-up questions to look at. So remember, Dr. Tuff had Lindsay fill out the PHQ-9. It does not ask questions such as, did you find it hard to wind down? Are you aware of dryness in your mouth? Through to, are you getting irritated or intolerant when something stops you from doing something you're focused on? Really good questions to ask that could lead into further exploration. So that's the DAS-21. So now we're going to look at the Edinburgh. So Edinburgh, Edinburgh is a city in Scotland. It's quite close to Glasgow. I've been to Glasgow, I haven't been to Edinburgh, but my cousin lived there for a period of time. So apparently it's a really good place to go. Am I getting confused? Am I confusing Edinburgh? Well, I might be confusing Edinburgh with Edinburgh. I may be, but anyway, apparently Edinburgh in Scotland's a good place to go. May have nothing to do with this. Beg your pardon. Okay, so if I get things wrong, I always acknowledge it. Okay, so the EPDS, the Edinburgh Post-partum Depression Scale, is a short 10-item self-report questionnaire. This is why it's important. This is why it really piqued my interest. This questionnaire or this scale was designed to identify mothers at risk of prenatal and postnatal depression. Postpartum depression is the most common complication of childbearing, and rates of help seeking for postnatal depression are generally low, making screening important. So this is one of the motivations for developing such a tool as this. So, in contrast to the PHQ-9, this questionnaire has been developed and designed specifically to help a clinician identify a mother who may be at high risk of developing postpartum depression, which is the most common complication following childbearing, but has the lower rates of seeking help for that. So mothers are potentially being misdiagnosed, symptoms being attributed to other circumstances, or just being treated as, yes, it's your hormones. Give it a few weeks, you'll get over it, dear. There, emotional support, as Dr. Tubbs apparently gave Lindsay. The scale asks, so the EPDS asks how the mother has felt during the previous week. In doubtful cases, it may be useful to repeat the tool after 2 weeks. And I'll tell you, one of the clinicians did administer this tool. There were 2 clinicians. They were registered mental health nurse practitioners, and they were working specifically in the area of postpartum depression and psychosis in an outpatient clinic. They weren't able to provide the inpatient care, hence they were recommending for Lindsay to be seen in another specialist service. And they administered the EPDS, whereas Dr. Tubb administered the PHQ-9, which is designed for children, 13 years old, adolescents and adults, males and females, not something specific for the very question at the heart of the matter for Lindsay when she presented to these mental health professionals. She was a new mother. She had her third child. Her third child was only months old, and she herself was describing this as postpartum depression and anxiety. So regardless of whether you thought this is the appropriate screening tool to then say, well, do I look at this further for this mother, or can I put this aside and what she's experiencing maybe something else? Now, Dr. Tuft and others will argue that, well, the fact it's depression and anxiety or even psychosis is not something specific and unique to the postpartum period, and the symptoms are the same. I will argue, no, they're not. There is a difference, and the key difference is, one, this is someone who has a young baby or young children to look after, and 2, this mother is going to be experiencing huge spikes and fluctuations in her hormones. For example, Lindsay was wanting to return to work. She was looking at weaning her youngest child from being breastfed to take the bottle. This was causing a lot of distress for her. And at that point, when a mother is changing from breastfeeding to not breastfeeding, again, changes in hormone levels are known to occur. So this would have been a logical questionnaire or scale to administer to assess whether this was someone who was at risk. So a score. So when we look at this, actually, I'll tell you a little bit more about this. So this was initially developed in 1987. A validation study was carried out on 84 mothers using the research diagnostic criteria for depressive illness, and that was obtained from the Goldberg Standardized Psychiatric Interview. So in 1987, the EPDS, as it went through its validation study, was found to have satisfactory sensitivity and specificity. So satisfactory sensitivity and specificity means that we can have more confidence that this particular scale is going to be sensitive enough to pick up the symptoms and the risk, and also specific enough to postpartum depression, which is what it is intended to be assessing. So not generalized anxiety. So that would be another GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, would be another diagnostic assessment process. This is specific to what it's looking at. It was also found to be sensitive to change in the severity of depression or the symptoms of depression over time. So this scale was also one that's been, you could administer it multiple times every 2 weeks. Now, the difference between asking, so the PHQ-9 asked the client to think, what has the last 2 weeks been like? Did you experience this some of the time, all of the time, none of the time? And the DAS-21 and the EPDS asked for the last week. So the last week, sort of focusing or narrowing the attention down onto, well, what's your last week been like? Because if you average over 2 week period, the person may say, well, it happens sometimes. But if they're now focusing on the last week, they'll be saying, this is happening a lot. So I always take that into account and might ask that as a follow-up question. However, the relevancy of asking over a 2 week period is that's part of the diagnostic criteria for many of our the diagnoses that are in the DSM-5 would be at least the last 2 weeks. And for mood and depression, anxiety often is asking, what is the last 2 weeks? Have these symptoms been present for 2 weeks or more? Okay, so the EPDS was, sorry, I jumped ahead again. So a 2011 study reviewed the 1987 validation research and found that the screening, if you screened using the EPDS, always facilitated an increase in identification rates over the key average of prevalence values. So that is important for me, given that postpartum depression is the most common difficulty that would occur post the birth of a child. This further validation study said, actually, this is picking up more women who are showing signs of postpartum depression than what's been reported in clinics, because women aren't going for help. They're very low rates, generally low rates of women going asking questions. I don't know whether that's changed, but that's what they were saying around this time. Interestingly, the EPDS also was able to identify a subgroup that had a prevalence rate between 5 times and 17 times greater than the general population. So that's looking at depressed mood in general. So this questionnaire is saying this is so specific to postpartum depression that this is able to pick up these women 5 times or 17 times more than if you used any other assessment just for depression. So I think that's really important. Okay, let's now have a look at the questionnaire, and then I want to just go to some of the comments that Dr. Berry made in her video, which she posted a couple of days ago. So let's have a look. All right. So this is the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression. Obviously this is a questionnaire for women who've just had a baby. As you are pregnant or have recently had a baby, we would like to know how you are feeling. What are the questions? So again, past 7 days, not just how you feel today. Are you able to laugh and see the funny side of things? Are you looking forward to doing things that you would find enjoyable? Have you blamed yourself unnecessarily when things went wrong? Have you been anxious or worried for no good reason? Have you felt scared or panicky for no good reason? Have things been getting on top of you? Have you been so unhappy that you've had difficulties sleeping? Have you felt sad or miserable? Have you been so unhappy that you've been crying? Have you thought of harming yourself? So again, really important questions that would lead to more follow-up questions from the clinician. And when I looked at this scale and I read through those questions, based on the testimony given during direct examination, during the prosecution's case, as they're presenting their case to the jury, I'm going, she has said, she has answered, like, for example, have you been able to laugh and see the funny side of things? Based on my recollection, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure that she had told, if not Dr. Tuff, others, that she wasn't able to laugh at things. She was very flat in her mood. So she would have likely have answered this as definitely not so much now, or no, not at all. Have you looked forward to doing things that you'd normally enjoy? Pretty sure that her statements to various clinicians were no. There was nothing. There was, even when she went out with her children, there was some video of outings with her and her family. She's saying, well, I might have looked as if I was enjoying it, but inside I wasn't. Have you blamed yourself unnecessarily when things went wrong? Well, it sounded like she was really blaming herself for the difficulty she was having bonding with her youngest child. She described it as forced. Have you been anxious or worried for no good reason? Well, from what she was saying, based on the evidence before the court, she would have answered yes, very often. Have you felt scared or panicky for no very good reason? She was very anxious and panicky. In fact, she did have a panic attack at times, and there was no reason. She woke up having a panic attack. She had a lot of worry and anxiety over things that when other people were trying to reassure her, she just was, even the doctors were trying to reassure her. Didn't alleviate her anxiety. She was saying things were getting on top of her. So she would have answered things like, no, most of the time, oh yes, most of the time I haven't been able to cope at all. Or yes, sometimes I haven't been coping as well as usual. Her and her husband had employed a nanny to come and assist. Lindsay had also asked her mother to come and assist. Her parents-in-law had offered. It was clear. She was saying, I am not coping. I need help. This is overwhelming. Have you been unhappy that you've been having difficulty sleeping? Based on the evidence before the court, Lindsay would have said yes most of the time or yes sometimes. Have you felt sad or miserable? She would have answered yes most of the time or yes quite often. Have you been so unhappy that you've been crying? There was at least one occasion that she told a health professional or a husband that she'd been crying all day. So maybe she would have said yes quite often or maybe yes most of the time. And then the thought of harming herself had occurred to her. So these questions seem to be so specifically related to what she was telling the clinicians and mental health professionals that someone like myself could take that testimony and then look at that and go, oh my goodness, this woman really meets this criteria. We need to have a look at this more closely. So how do you interpret the results? So a scores fall between, as you said, between 0, 1, 2, or 3. So total score could be, because it's 10 questions. If you answered 3 to like yes all the time to all 10 questions, you would get a score of 30. If you answered no, not at all, I don't have any of those problems, not occurred at all over the last week, then you get a score of 0. A score of 13 and above is indicative, so it is pointing that this is a person who may very well be experiencing low mood or depression, and or this person may be at high risk of developing a depressive order. So that's of a score of 13 or above. So during cross-examination, the two of the clinicians who had administered the score were asked what was Lindsay's score. On the initial assessment, the score of Lindsay, so remember, this is not Dr. Tuff, this is a subsequent practice that did specialise in postnatal depression. Lindsay was found to have a score of 17, and that was described as moderate to severe. So remember, the highest score you can get is 30. A few weeks later, and I am meaning a few weeks later, the scale, the EPDS was administered again, and this time she obtained a score of 23. So that clearly, to myself as a clinician, corroborates, it is self-report, but she's been consistent in saying my symptoms are getting worse. This is despite numerous medications and changes in medication. So this is why I was concerned about the evidence and the testimony of Dr. Tuft, and that she, on cross-examination and direct examination, often sort of minimized the concerns, suggested that when Lindsay queried around the constant changes in medication, increasing dosage levels, the side effects she was experiencing, and that they may be side effects directly as a result of the medication. And Dr. Tufts was saying to her, no, you just need to accept that you are depressed. And I scratched my head when I heard that, because I thought, well, if she's depressed 4 months after, within the first year or 2 years of the birth of her last child, surely that is postpartum depression. But this clinician, this psychiatrist, would not say postpartum depression, even though this seems to be her specific interest. And I was just left scratching my head going, is that, how is that? And I thought, it's a question. I don't know the answer. I'm just going to put this question out there. During Dr. Tuft's residency, when she was working in an acute mental health facility as a registrar psychiatrist, was she seeing on a daily basis clients with quite significant mental health issues? so that when she saw Lindsay in her practice, and remember when I say saw, I'm not talking face to face, sitting in the same room across from her. I'm saying saw her on the screen, and if you're watching this, just as you're seeing me on the screen, that she didn't see or recognize the significant symptoms, or in her mind and her experience, and comparing them to what she had seen and experienced in her residency and her training to become a qualified psychiatrist, that what she was seeing in Lindsay, someone in the community, as an outpatient, that her symptoms weren't that severe. I was just left scratching my head at that this psychiatrist who claims to have an interest in postpartum depression had made that statement, that when Lindsay was querying that her symptoms are getting worse, and was this a result of the medication? And she is told, no, this is just simply what you're depressed. And then I thought, how confusing for this woman. So then when she's told, if you do go into crisis, here are the helplines, and I have put those in the description for the first video, and I'll put them in the description for the second video for anyone here in New Zealand. So she's given the number for these helplines to call, and she does 2 occasions. But she's told, again, your symptoms aren't severe enough. Okay, we hear you having thoughts, but you don't have a plan, so therefore there's nothing we can do for you. And as Attorney Melanie Little said, well, surely by the time a person's got a plan, maybe it's, we're getting too close to maybe not being successful. Maybe just they're saying these thoughts are really bothering me and I'm really distressed enough to bring a helpline. That's an indication this is quite significant. And then on top of that, she does present to ED. So now she really is in crisis. She does get assessed or involuntarily admitted to a mental health facility. But because it's a holiday, they don't have the staff on board, apparently, allegedly, to provide her the care that she needs. She's wanting to be with her daughter for a fifth birthday. Maybe that didn't show good insight. Despite the claim that she was a good advocate for herself, that as a registered nurse, she had a good understanding of medication, etc. They also knew she wasn't always being compliant with their treatment plan, their medication, and that wasn't ringing alarm bells. And then, how confusing, Lindsay and her husband knew she was really beginning to spiral downwards, really struggling. The thoughts were so intrusive, really causing her distress. She finally gets pointed towards a specialist unit. But by the time she's seen by them for the intake, they say they can't take her. She's not appropriate for their program due to the high level of medications and the side effects of these medications making her symptoms worse. And she needs to come off those medications or to have those levels reduced in order for her to be able to fully partake in the program. So she's told, well, go away, address that and come back. So what happens? She does go back to Dr. Taft, who has not contacted any of these other health professionals, even though she knows that Lindsay has sought help from others. She knew about the North Shore perinatal mental health service. She knew that she was going to this other service. She knew that she was admitted into Maclean Hospital on the 1st of January. But not once did either any of the clinicians from any of the facilities or Dr. Taft, who was the person who saw her last, communicate with each other. One service of prescribing this medication, Dr. Taft does this. She gets turned away from the specialist unit because of medication. What happens? Dr. Taft increases her medication. Her medications go up. and she gets worse. So let's see what Dr. Berry has to say. I was interested to look at Dr. Berry to see what she had to say in regard to, where have we gone? Here she is. In regard to the fact that Dr. Tuft saw Lindsay via telehealth. So I'm just going to bring this up. I'll go to share screen. So Dr. Berry, you can find her on YouTube under Dr. Berry. Let me just stop that for a second. Here we go. Let me just get to the right place. I want your transcripts. I want comments on the side. Let me go to the transcripts. Just pulling this up. I've watched quite a bit of Dr. Berry over the time. Sometimes she is able just to put just a light-hearted slant on things. She obviously has a wicked sense of humour. She talks openly about how she herself has a diagnosis of ADHD and how that may impact on the way that she is. So let me go to say. So I'm just flipping through. I thought I had this set up. Here we go. Let's see. Maybe here we go. Yes. Right. So here we're about 12 minutes 36 into Dr. Berry's presentation. And this is Dr. Berry, psychologist, discusses the former psychiatrist testimony in the Lindsay Clancy trial. So this is 12 minutes 36 in, and this is where she's going to be talking around the use of whether a client comes in to have a face-to-face meeting or whether they will do this over Zoom. Okay, so I'm just moving forward through to 13 minutes 6. I'm going to share the screen and we'll just go through a short clip of this. I'm just going to click on that part and go full screen and push back.
Amen. There can be issues with transportation. Flyers for flight. Me, that means free. Because I just that here today.
Okay, I'll just stop that for now and go back and then see if we can move to, I lost her transcript again. Let's bring up the transcript. So as you heard there, Dr. Berry is talking about the use of Zoom in telehealth. I myself do pay for a secure, the secure component of Zoom. Any transcript or video recording that I do, I do prefer to make sure that that is saved to my computer, not to the cloud, and that way then I can save that to a secure hard drive, which is a password protected. So I'm not saving that to just my computer, that if you clicked on my computer you could then see. It is saved to an external hard drive. Okay. So at about 17 minutes in, so let me start this again. So now she's talking directly about the preference for using, doing your initial assessment using telehealth.
Either foot, like shaking. I can't see numbers. And now, so I don't know what Dr. Tuss did for some individuals will provide, like, I need to see your waist, or like situate the camera so I can see, your entire body. That's weird. I've never heard somebody in a telehealth session being asked to like put their entire body in frame unless they're doing a remote psychological evaluation. Personally, I'm not a fan of remote for like telehealth psychological evaluations. I prefer in person. That's my own personal preference. I will do a virtual intake, so that's our initial appointment. But for psychological testing, I have to see you in my office. I get a different feel for people when.
Okay, I'll stop sharing that now. So there you heard Dr. Berry, similar to myself, saying, if I'm going to do an initial assessment, I want to see the person in my office. I'm not comfortable to do this over telehealth. I am trying to escape from that full screen here, and all of a sudden it's not letting me. Let me see if I can. Okay, here we go. Right. I want to see if I can go back to the transcript, because then I'm going to go on to do a bit of a comparison with our New Zealand case. Just going through her transcript here. I might come back to this clip in another video, because I think Dr. Berry's insights are really important. It's helpful for me to hear from somebody who's practicing in the United States around some of her insights into medication, treatment, etc., in comparison to myself here in New Zealand. Okay, so let me go back to the case here in New Zealand. So as I said, the Lindsay Clancy case is ongoing in the United States. The trial is still underway. The prosecution is still presenting their case. So no decision has been made. This is a case that's been tried before a jury. And the question before the jury will be, was the tragic loss of these children a result of Lindsay Clancy's deliberate, intentional act, or was the result, the tragedy, a result of postpartum depression with psychosis, potentially even as a direct result of medical mistreatment, or the medication, what they call it, medication toxicity, that she was given too much medication and that contributed to it. So now I want to talk about our New Zealand case. And again, trigger warning, this is so distressing. It's really heartbreaking. This case occurred some time ago in New Zealand. There is an appeal, I understand, appeal that will be heard next February. So Lauren Dickason was found guilty of causing the death of her 3 children. So Lauren Dickason and her husband and 3 children migrated from South Africa to New Zealand, and after going through, this is 16, prior to September of 2021, that they arrived in Timaru after going through their what do you call it, like the word's gone out of my mind. They arrived in Auckland, and of course this is during that time when we had the worldwide shutdown due to health, and you had to stay in a facility for a period of time. Actually, it's gone out of my mind. It was right there. Anyway, so they arrived in Timaru. But let's go back to Lauren. So Lauren grew up in Pretoria, South Africa. From the age of 15, she experienced depression and anxiety. She also experienced postnatal depression. She later studied medicine at the University of Cape Town, completing her degree in 2004, and she became a medical doctor. She completed a rural health practice in Victoria and then met her husband, who was an orthopedic surgeon. They married in 2006. Now, Lauren underwent multiple fertility struggles. She underwent 17 rounds of IVF, and she required donor eggs. In 2013, Lauren and her husband lost their first child, a girl who was born after 18 weeks of pregnancy. And this wee girl did not survive. She did not return to work following the death of that daughter. And instead she became a part-time surgeon assistant to her husband. Lauren and her husband then went on to have 3 further children. She had a child. They had a child who was 6 years old and twins who were 2 years old. So there's the tragic loss of these 3 beautiful girls occurred within 2 years of the postpartum period, and that's become important in Lindsay Clancy's trial, where it's been said over and over again that the postpartum period and the onset of depression, postpartum depression, while typically closer to the birth of the child, can occur within that 2-year period. After the birth of the twins, so the older child was born in 2014, and the twins were born in 2018. The couple enlisted the services of a nanny who worked with the family between 2018 and 2020. She was diagnosed with major depression with underlying anxiety in 2015. So remember, she tragically lost her first daughter. Then, after the birth of the second daughter, who was 6 years old at the time of the tragedy, and that daughter was born in 2014, 2015, she was diagnosed with postpartum depression, major depression with underlying anxiety. And again, and it was linked to the period of postpartum depression that she experienced after the death of her first daughter. Apparently, she reportedly experienced flashbacks due to the death of that first child, sleep difficulties, crying, thoughts of self-deletion, SI, panic attacks, restlessness, detached feelings, and intrusive thoughts. And when I read that, I was like, yeah, that's exactly what Lindsay Clancy described. When I was on placement at the Mothers and Babies unit, the mothers that I sat in on their assessments, some while they were prior to the birth of the children, they were being monitored, and some afterwards. So, unfortunately, due to the premature birth of the first child, lost that first child and experienced postpartum depression at that time. Then, after the birth of his second child, within a year of that birth, she again experiences low mood and is diagnosed with major depression with underlying anxiety, which had also been in that postpartum period. Then she has the twins, and the twins were born in 2018. And after the birth of the twins, she again experiences anxiety and depression leading up to and following the birth of the twins. In 2019, so we're going from 2013 through to 2019 now. 2019, she does go to see a psychiatrist after experiencing intrusive thoughts of harm towards her children. She goes to see a psychiatrist. And this episode had been triggered after she and the nanny struggled to put the twins to bed. And again, I'm thinking part of what was going on for Lindsay was her concern around the children and her care of the children, and there seems so many similarities here. She described the oldest child being a difficult child, saying that that child had lashed out often, slapped and bit her, and that her children were never enough. And again, there seems to be some similarities with Lindsay, as Lindsay also was describing one of the children as very difficult to manage. So in 2019, they had planned to immigrate to New Zealand. However, those will know that in 2020, there's this worldwide shutdown, and that had to be delayed. Their plans of coming to New Zealand were delayed. There was a reason why they decided to come to New Zealand. That was following some unrest in South Africa, and according to information, Lauren had become quite concerned for the safety of her children and herself and her husband. And I've spoken to quite a number of people who've come to New Zealand from South Africa, and that seems to be a similar story. And I also wondered, I have not assessed Lauren, I don't know, but what I've seen in some cases too, this underlying trauma or distress or even PTSD based on experiences that some people have had. So during this time, she continued to experience episodes of depression, suicidal thoughts during the worldwide shutdown, but her mood improved between 2020 and late 2020 and June 2021. Apparently, she experienced a 2-month period of remission and had participated in a wellness program. However, Lauren, chose to stop taking her antidepressant medication in March of 2021, but then she resumed taking that medication in August of 2021. So as I mentioned, her mental health deteriorated due to unrest triggered by the imprisonment of a former president, Jacob Zuma. She feared for the safety of her children, and she kept them at home. And again, during that time, she experienced intrusive thoughts of harm. And she had confided in her husband, who reacted with anger and convinced her to resume her medication. She continued to experience those thoughts following foot surgery, but this time she did not disclose them since she feared it would affect their immigration plans. That same month, her husband, he received his work visa from Immigration New Zealand. Then apparently in July of 2021, one of her friends had recited a poem on a video that she posted on TikTok, which was named Mum Needs a Minute. And it's about the struggle of raising children and chaos that may occur in a mother's brain. And Dickason responded by saying, awesome, XXX. That's exactly how I feel. So evidence that came up in court was that during this time, Lauren had begun to search or do some research on ways of causing an overdose, and that her mental health again deteriorated, and she experienced significant weight loss, as did Lindsay Clancy. So that's the word I was looking for. Following the 2 weeks in managed isolation, that's what I was looking for at the beginning. So they did 2 weeks managed isolation in Auckland. They're right, I think it was Auckland, could have been Christchurch, because we did have managed isolation here in Christchurch as well. They arrived in Timaru on 11th of September 2021, 5 days before the tragic loss of the children. Apparently she was unhappy during her time in Timaru. She was upset with the appearance of the town residents, describing the rental accommodation as small, disgusting and creepy. She feared her children would be the target of bullying when they became older. And she seems to have been triggered by the treatment of Indigenous Maori and compared that to how people were treated during apartheid in South Africa. She apparently then regretted coming to New Zealand, and she became fixated on these issues to the point that they became, and this is according to the defence experts, they became delusions reinforced by her depression. So that's the background. Now I do want to jump to, we don't often have, we don't have in New Zealand YouTube channels which present the full trial. There are, in some cases, media are allowed in the court, both print media as well as cameras. So what I am going to share is a clip. I'm going to bring that up and find myself. I just lost myself. Here we go. So I will share this clip.
The final witness in the Lauren Dickason murder trial started giving evidence for the defence. Forensic psychologist says the accused told him there was a devil on his shoulder when she put the
Just going to stop that for a minute. You probably would have heard that. So this is one of our well-known news anchors. This clip is freely available on YouTube. It is from the TV1 News YouTube channel. And I am just going to bring that to full screen and then play this. So the item is just being introduced.
Defences of infanticide and insanity are both available to the mother who killed her three.
This defence expert interviewed murder-accused Lauren Dickason 9 times within the confines of this mental health hospital.
I spent a very long time with Miss Dickason. I spent 20 hours with her.
She told him about the 3 occasions she'd had violent thoughts to witness.
Okay, I'm going to move forwards through some of this so we can hear his testimony. This clinical psychologist, Ghazi, I have not seen him for some time. I actually knew him while I was training at Canterbury University, and he was in uh, the clinical psychologist cohort that were coming through behind my year. He has worked in forensic psychology for a long period of time. I recently had a conversation with one of the forensic psychologists who would have been the senior psychologist or the principal psychologist, consultant psychologist of the forensic unit. You would have seen in that news footage, they showed some of the buildings that are located on the Hill Morton campus. This is part of the Christchurch Hospital, the public hospital here in Christchurch, which the mental health facility there provides both locked facility, acute mental health facility, inpatient and outpatient here. So this is Ghazi, who I understand is now working in private practice, and he was asked by the defence to assess Lauren Dickason. Now, you would have heard there 20 hours, 20 hours of direct face-to-face contact to assess Lauren, as opposed to the assessment of Dr. Tufts and others of Lindsay Clancy. I understand Dr. Tufts' initial assessment was for approximately 45 minutes. So Ghazi, very experienced clinical psychologist here in New Zealand, 20 hours.
Am I thinking like this? It's terrifying me, making me feel even worse about myself. Even when I had these thoughts, I loved them even more.
Okay, I'm just going to skip forward again. This is a news item. I'm more interested in what Ghazi is saying during his evidence.
Either way, I felt like a seed was planted that day.
The day the mother.
You're just aware of YouTube's rules, not wanting to breach any of those, just moving forward. We're wanting to hear.
I was feeling so out of control, trying to figure in my head how to get back.
And they just stop sharing and jump to a news article rather than continue with this. I didn't realise there was so much photographs of the children, which I find distressing. Okay, so let's move this over here. So I can talk about, I've got here one of the news articles. So as I said, so Dr. Matoa Ghazi, he gave in his evidence, he said that while the death of these children were brutal, callous, determined, and deliberate, Lauren cannot be held criminally responsible. And I'm quoting from a news source here. This is the News Talk ZB. This is a well-known radio station here in New Zealand, and I deem this to be a reliable source. So, quote, this is Dr. Matawa, this is Ghazi speaking. During his evidence, I do not consider that Miss Dickinson's mental state at the time of the alleged offending precluded her from understanding the nature and quality of the acts, he said. To the contrary, I consider that she was purposeful and deliberate throughout her offending and acted with full consciousness of her actions with great determination. However, such was the severity of her depressive illness and associated distorted thinking at that time that ultimately she thought she and the three children were better off not to be alive. Does that sound familiar? Because when I read that, that was very familiar to me. Just managed to lose myself again. Okay, I'm just going to bring myself over here. So he says, it is my opinion She did not know that the alleged acts were morally wrong to the commonly accepted standard of right and wrong. He said her defense that she was not, she could not be held criminally liable for the death of children, even though she did cause that. He said, Mrs. Dickason has a history of postpartum depression following the birth of her children. My opinion is that her problems with depression in the 11-year period leading up to her alleged offending were very much embroiled in her fertility problems, losing her first child, antenatal anxiety, then postnatal depression that remained chronically clinically referred to as the intermittent symptom pattern. She always had vulnerabilities in her earlier life and adolescence life in her early 20s, and these themselves are risk factors for developing postpartum depression. The factors that declines in her mental health all occurred after 2010, from the time of trying to conceive to eventually having children. Dr. Matawa Ghazi said that Lauren's family had even said she never returned to her baseline mental health after she lost that first child. Dr. Matawa then says, I therefore consider on a balance of probabilities that her major depressive episode, severe type, at the time of the alleged offending, was an extension and part of her chronic postnatal depression since 2015. So I just had to take a wee pause there, because reading those descriptions, and I've not spoken to Ghazi, Dr. Matawa at all. I don't know him, like, and personally, we don't socialize together. I knew him while I was studying, while he was studying. I've seen him at different workshops that we may have attended together over the years or conferences. But more lately, I've worked in a completely different area than what he has. His career has gone down a pathway where he is a very well experienced and respected forensic psychologist, working in private practice. Tragically, though, the outcome for Lauren Dickason was that the jury found her to be criminally liable. That case is being appealed and will be heard on appeal in February of 2027. But there's so many similarities between Lauren Dickason's case and Lindsay Clancy's case around their symptom presentation, what they described, and even what Lauren described and spoke to Dr. Matawa Ghazi after the fact, that it just struck me how similar these two were. So my deep sigh is that woman like Lauren, and I don't know the legal aspects, maybe I wasn't in court, I don't know all the ins and outs of the legal case, that information has not been made available to me. But I do put a lot of faith in Dr. Matawa's findings. He's highly respected, and I would expect that he would have done a very, very thorough, comprehensive assessment. And it just strikes me that women such as Lauren and Lindsay continue to struggle to have their mental health difficulties correctly recognised for what they were, to receive the correct treatment. Now, in Lauren Dickanson's case, I have not seen any evidence. I haven't gone through any of the evidence. I don't know what treatment she was or was not provided. Only there was reference to antidepressant medication, which may or may not have been effective. It's my understanding that her husband has since divorced her and returned to South Africa, to live in South Africa. And Lindsay, not Lindsay, Lauren Dickason continues to remain here in Christchurch. My understanding is that she at least was initially, if not still, continued to be treated in the mental health facility, the forensic unit at Hillmorton, until she was deemed sufficiently well enough to be transferred to prison to continue with the sentence. And it does raise the question of how much do we know about postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis? How well has this been studied? What is the if you like, the beginning of the end period? When do we say this is no longer postpartum? This is now something else. Remember that for Lauren, it was around a 2-year period, but she'd experienced these symptoms almost consistently since the loss of that first child. And Gazi said for 11 years. And it was obviously complicated grief, maybe PTSD, but then again with the 17 rounds of IVF treatment to be able to have her children. So think about the hormone fluctuations there. Is there any evidence or any research around the potential that IVF treatment may also be linked to postpartum depression? Are we seeing women who have been unsuccessful in their IVF treatment who present with the same or similar symptoms of depression and low mood, and it's not being recognised for what it is? And the difference for me as a clinician is that when hormone levels are involved and fluctuations in a woman's internal state, her hormone endocrine system due to this, that needs to be considered. That is a different, for me as a clinician, that is going to be a different type of presentation from somebody who may be experiencing depression as a result of circumstances. Say the tragic loss of a partner or a parent. Postpartum depression in and of itself and by its nature, in my mind, this is my personal opinion, that it is based on some of my training and understanding, even though I'm not, postpartum depression hasn't been my special interest, not like Dr. Tubbs. I have worked in other areas, but I just see this as different. And I think we need to raise awareness of this, speak more about it, provide better services to women to protect women and children, and have a greater understanding of what postpartum depression is. I know I've rambled on again. It seems to be my go-to. If anyone does watch this at a later time, I do hope you find it informative. I hope it also raises some questions for you that you may do your own research. I hope, if not tomorrow, maybe later this week, to show more of Dr. Berry and her review of the case, and then you may be able to do a comparison, or I might be able to do a comparison of what Dr. Berry said about Lindsay Clancy, what Dr. Gazi Matai has said about Lauren Dickason, and then my own personal views. So for now, ka kite, and hope to see you soon.